Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things we have to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, if you have hubcaps, go ahead and remove those. Next, we're going to remove all 4 of our 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, we have a nice clear view of our axle nut right here. There's a cotter pin that locks it in, so let's go ahead and remove the cotter pin and then the nut. Now we'll use a 32mm socket to remove the axle nut. Now grab a hammer and a punch. We're going to come right in the center here and break the axle free from the wheel bearing. Now let's move up to this area here on the strut. We're going to go ahead and grab onto that ABS wire and remove it from its mounting points on either side of the strut. Now let's go ahead and remove the clip that holds our brake hose to the strut itself. Grab onto that brake hose, give it a little wiggle, and then draw it down and away from the strut. Next, we're going to move up to this area right here. We're going to remove the bolts that come through from the front to the rear of where it connects the knuckle to the strut. Make sure that's free. We'll leave that in there for now and do the same to the other. Now we can start removing these. To do that, I'm just going to go ahead and wiggle on this a little bit, and I can remove the bolts. Let's do the same on this one. If it doesn't want to pop out, give it a couple loving bonks with a hammer. Now we can grab onto the knuckle. We're going to start pulling this towards us or away from the car. At the same time, we want to be pushing the axle in the opposite direction. Okay, now I'll come in through here. Go ahead and grab onto that axle. We'll pull it out of the wheel bearing and then slide it up and through this area here. Set that down. And now we're just going to put a strap on this to hold it up, so we're not putting any pressure on our ABS wire or our brake flex hose. Now let's just go ahead and do another safety strap. This one's to hold the axle for us, so when we start to remove it, we don't have to worry about it falling out and potentially hurting us. Now you just want to make sure you put a nice collection bucket underneath the area where the axle goes into the transmission. After that, let's use a nice pry bar. We're going to get in between the axle and the transmission and gently pry, being very careful not to damage the transmission in any way. Now we can go ahead and get this safety strap off of here, grab the axle, and remove it from the vehicle. Once you have the axle out of there, let's have a close look at the transmission seal right here. You want to make sure that it's still nice and soft and pliable, not torn or worn in any way. Let's also go ahead and just wipe it down real quick, make sure it's clean and free of any debris. And now we can grab our brand new axle. Let's go ahead and start inserting that axle into the transmission here. You want to try to get it as lined up as straight as possible. Now once you have it lined up with the hole, let's go ahead and try to press it in. You want to kind of feel for a click. Twist it a little bit side to side, and then let's grab a rubber mallet. We'll give the end a couple loving bonks here, being very careful not to damage the axle in any way. Now when I was bonking on that, I could hear an audible difference. The first 2 sounded hollow, and then the third was a nice deep bonk. So I want to take a peek in there and just make sure that it's nice and bottomed out against the transmission. Now let's go ahead and coat our axle splines on the outer portion here with some copper never-sees. Now we can start taking the axle and we're going to go ahead and put it into the wheel bearing. Once you have it in there, let's go ahead and start bringing this up. Just be very careful not to damage your ABS wire or your flex hose along the way. All right, now I'm just going to have this lined up. Let's take our 2 mounting bolts with some red thread locker. We'll start them both in there. Then we can go ahead and put our nuts. We'll bottom these out, and then we're going to torque each of these to 110 foot-pounds. Get our flex hose back lined up here. It should just fit right into the strut. Sometimes you just have to twist it a little bit. Once you have it lined up, go ahead and put in your locking clip. Make sure it's nice and secure. Let's remount this ABS wire into its brackets. Double check that, make sure it's secure as well. Now we can get our axle nut on here. Go ahead and bottom this out by hand, never with an impact gun. Now at this point, we're going to continue on to torquing this in a minute, but I'm just going to go ahead and put the wheel up on here. We'll snug it up, get it back on the ground so this can't spin, and then we can torque this and the wheel. Now with the wheel back on the ground, we can continue torquing. Let's go ahead and torque this axle nut to 92 foot-pounds. Now let's make sure we lock this in. Come on. Put that cotter pin in. Make sure that you peen it over so it doesn't actually loosen up on you. And now we're going to torque the lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. If you have a hubcap, go ahead and put that on now. You want to make sure that you have your valve stem hole lined up with the valve stem on the wheel. Line it up. Give it a couple loving bonks. Make sure it's secure so it doesn't fall off while you're driving down the road. After you're done all that, go ahead and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks.